Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. The busy season is either here or nearly here for many of our area producers. Choppers are still rolling, and over the past week or so, even seen some combines picking some high moisture corn. Whether you're already in that busy season or anxiously waiting, we sure appreciate you making time for this week's show. Coming up on the program, we'll take a look at how one organization is helping producers that were impacted by a natural disaster and get some advice on sulfur application. But first, we'll take you out to the sandhills of Nebraska for a closer look at last week's Goodmanson Sandhills Laboratory Open House. Last week, our team hit the road and made our way out to the Sandhills in order to cover the event. Over the course of this trip, we were fortunate enough to get some insights into some of the most pressing issues that cattle producers are facing. The in-person and online event took place last Wednesday, August 24th, and featured several topics, including post-fire grazing, eastern red cedar control methods, and environmental footprints of cattle production. But the day began with a cattle market update from our friend and colleague. You've seen him here on Market Journal. That's Elliott Dennis.
Yeah, so the primary message was that we do have shrinking supplies. There's pretty robust export demand and pretty stable, surprisingly stable domestic beef consumption. And so when we're talking about, potential impacts for prices, it's the favorability is actually really strong going into the end of the fall, that we could have strong prices. I put up some data to compare where the video auctions were really pricing the market at compared to what the futures were pricing at. And really we say that the video is actually pricing it a little bit more aggressive, that prices could be a little bit higher than what we're seeing on the board right now by about $10. There were about videos pricing in at about $197 for the October contract, and the futures board plus basis is probably at the $187 range. Challenges that we need to work through, and if we can get to 20.
While Elliott had a lot of material to cover at the event, we were curious to get his take on marketing strategies and risk management advice as we head into the fall season.
Right now, I would say that the market is probably stable to upward, and so staying in the cash markets is actually probably the best marketing strategy. Well, generally, what we're looking for in the fall, at least what I'm looking for, is we're really going to start looking at placement numbers, see if those drop off, and more importantly, that corn price. That's going to really impact the feedlot's willingness to pay for cattle as they come to market. And ultimately, we talk about some of that drought condition that potentially continue to shape up over this fall, and higher hay prices. So those are really the things that I'm watching for. If that is combined with consumer demand starts to weaken a little bit, I think there's opportunities to put in like a floor using a traditional CME put option, or even sometimes the more affordable livestock risk protection. Just as a reminder, the livestock risk protection is only available a minimum of 13 weeks out. And whereas the put options can be used more on the short-term basis. So I think we're safe to stay in the cash market right now, but make sure that we continue to watch the markets and adjust accordingly.
We'll have more from this event on the weeks ahead. However, if you'd like to review the recorded versions of those presentations featured at the event, they are currently available online. We've taken the liberty to posting a link to those videos along with this story on the Market Journal website. From one extension event to another, you might recall a few weeks ago our team was at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center, which is located near Mead. There we got a closer look at the 4 R's of Nutrient Management Field Day. While we were there, we also had the opportunity to catch up with the Nebraska Extension educator Nathan Meuller, and we got some of his tips on sulfur application. Market Journal's Mike Straw brings us this story.
With coal plants being cleaner, there has been less atmospheric deposition of sulfur with our rainfalls, causing a shift in demand for sulfur in fields.
Yeah, just that the shifting nature or changing nature of sulfur, we get a lot less deposition, atmospheric deposition with our rainfalls due to coal plants being cleaner, so we get less sulfur deposition than we used to. We'd probably almost 20 pounds before, and now we're more like at 5 in a year. So that's really shifted demand for sulfur in crops here in eastern Nebraska, particularly southeast, where we've seen the biggest change in that atmospheric deposition. So my takeaway was UNL's research. We don't have as much current research as Iowa State does. Iowa State's done quite a bit, and so we're using Iowa State recommendations, especially here in the eastern tier of counties, and the current recommendation is 15 pounds of sulfur per acre applied for corn on fine textured soils and 25 on coarse textured soils. When it comes to soybeans, we're not seeing the same type of yield responses. So my current recommendation is actually just to fertilize ahead of corn in that corn-soybean rotation, and that there'll be enough residual, especially in our fine textured soils, for that soybean crop. So only in a sandy situation may we need it in soybeans, but I wouldn't just assume we need it in soybeans. I talked about tissue tests, so plant tissue analysis, taking that uppermost fully expanded trifoliate, as well as we're getting kind of past that window now. We can actually collect seed at harvest from the combine and send that into the lab, and that can be another diagnostic tool to kind of tell us where we're sitting on sulfur fertility, where that soybeans fall throughout the year, and tell us if we're good, or maybe we need to look at modifying what we're doing for a sulfur fertilizer program.
Planning ahead, the right source, and timely sulfur application is important to providing the nutrients crops need to be successful.
Application timing and sources is something growers really need to consider. Our main ones are ammonium sulfate dry and calcium sulfate, which is gypsum dry. We have ammonium thiosulfate, which is a liquid, and then elemental sulfur. And timing on all is when products are in the sulfate form, it's going to be available right away to the crop. So we're talking a spring application ahead of corn, or for example. But if it's elemental sulfur, that's biologically mediated process. So we need warmth, we need moisture, temperatures to convert that from that reduced state to getting it oxidized. That takes time. So you can't apply elemental sulfur in the spring and assume you're going to get that and have that in a timely fashion, the meat crop demand. So that's something you need to plan ahead in terms of maybe a year ahead, or at least the fall before at the soonest. And then there's other sulfur sources. Manure is an important sulfur source. There's also fertilizer products that are co-mixed, where there's sulfur already mixed in with some other nutrients in that granular. For example, a product called Mez from Mosaic. And then the other big one I talked about, which is work from Charlie Wortman and others, was looking at how much sulfur is in the irrigation water that we're applying during the season. There's quite a bit in parts of the state. So there's areas where we may be putting out already enough just through irrigation, and we need to look at, even maybe what we put on last year for irrigation, for figuring out if we're going to think maybe have more residual sulfur, sulfate sulfur this coming year. So there's a lot of things to keep track of. The main thing was the right rate, the right place, the right source, and the right time.
After over 150 on-farm research projects by Iowa State University, it has been found that there is a yield response and economic return with sulfur application.
I think in terms of profitability, we're seeing a yield response. For example, Iowa State on soybeans had only 2 sites that were responsive out of 13, but there was a 4 bushel yield response. So there's obviously some profit there. When we look at cost of fertilizer, price of soybeans, that's a profitable situation. But the other 11, they weren't. And so that's why I'm a little hesitant to throw a lot at soybeans now and focus on corn. Iowa's done over 150 on-farm studies or research studies on sulfur, showing there's a yield response and an economic return to that sulfur application. So, there's also variability in the field. All within the field's not same. Sandy soils of the field with low organic matter are more likely to be responsive, because we're just going to get less sulfur from breakdown of organic matter. The other piece where especially here in eastern Nebraska, where we have heavier textured soil, especially in southeast, it's where we have eroded hillsides, where we've lost our topsoil, so we have low organic matter, where we've done dirt work from terraces. And so you can definitely see some spatial variability across the field. So there is opportunity for variable rate application. It's hard to quantify or generate those maps, though, comparison to lime application or phosphorus or potassium or zinc, where things are a little bit more fixed. Sulfur is fairly mobile in the soil, and you need to sample deeper to get that profile sulfate. So really, it's more of a flat rate at this time, unless you have past yield monitor data or know from aerial imagery maybe where some of those spots are at where variable rate could be built in.
Sandy soils are lower in organic matter and have less durable structure. A higher sulfur application is recommended for soils with the sandy makeup.
Yeah, we know that when we have soils that are sandy, there's 2 things going on there. One, they're typically low organic matter, and we get a lot of our organic matter is what's contributing to the sulfur that our crops are currently getting, and why some fields aren't responsive. So that's low organic matter in sandy soils. The second is because they have, you know, the structure of those sandy soils, they're more prone to leaching. So sulfate is a mobile nutrient like nitrate, probably not as mobile, but if we get excess irrigation or rainfall, we can move that sulfate down through the profile and out of the root zone. And so those are two things that we're fighting against in sandy soils. And that's why the recommendation is actually higher rate of sulfur application on sandy soils than fine textured soils.
Remembering the 4 R's when looking to apply sulfur is key. They are the right rate, the right place, the right source, and the right time. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
Thank you for that story, Mike. More information on this topic is available at your fingertips when you visit the website cropwatch.unl.edu. Time now for a review of the latest grain market news. This week we were joined by Heather Ramsey from the ARC Group. We began by breaking down some of the most influencing factors that are impacting the commodity trade.
There's a lot. It's always interesting when you start looking at what's affecting the market, and the list keeps growing all the time. So right now, obviously, we were kind of hung over from the pro farmer number earlier this week. Saw some really good positive movement on corn from that standpoint. We've got some big soybean sales going on behind the scenes that haven't gained as much traction. Again, because of the numbers we saw from Pro Farmer being very supportive to a large crop of soybeans. That's up for debate on who believes that or not. But we've got soybean sales going on in the background, and I think gaining a lot of traction right now too is a concern over what the Fed is going to do with increasing interest rates. They were kind of holed up for a while there in Jackson Hole actually discussing this, and so there's some concern over what do our macro policies look like going forward for the next 3 to 6 months. So that is weighing a little bit as well. Just briefly in the headlines, I did just see another attack over in Ukraine from Russia onto one of the export facilities that we're kind of banking on seeing grain movement out of. So nothing's really shook out as of today yet on what kind of damage or what that means. But again, all of those things that we've been talking about for 9 months now are still there, and every day it's something new, a different direction. So just all the things.
You mentioned the Fed. There was a lot of attention paid on that meeting there at Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Mm-hmm. For the viewer out there who might be questioning, why does this interest rate spill into commodities? Why does that matter? Your take.
Cost of money is a huge deal for the farm. So there's the biggest reason to be concerned from a farming standpoint is you borrow money. There's very few farmers who don't borrow anything. So the idea that we don't need to worry about what the cost of money is silly. We need to know where those trends are going, what's going to be happening to us, because the front end of our business is very expensive. On the opposite side of it, looking at where prices flow or are sitting at right now, interest rate hikes are short-term, nearby reaction is negative to commodities. Strictly because then fund managers start looking for other places with better returns. They sort of want to neutralize positions. When you're dealing with huge volumes of money like they are, they want to neutralize positions, kind of feel out where they're at, and then reevaluate where they should be investing. So interest rates affect both sides. So what the Fed has to say is going to be really important going forward. But I think the biggest one to the farmer today, in my opinion, is going to be cost of money. How does that set us up going into next year on one of the most expensive crops we're going to plant ever?
Heather, we have to talk about basis. What's the adjective you'd use to describe basis locally here in Nebraska?
Exciting. It's so fun right now. We're looking at basis levels here on the very front end of harvest. Now this is obviously a limited, acreage that we're talking about. It's either shorter season dry land. It could be some higher moisture corn going into feedlots. But between feedlots, shuttle loaders, this front end of harvest, these are some of the single best basis values I've ever booked in my life for clients. And how can you not? So I'm looking at numbers that are anywhere from $1 to $2 better than a historical gut slot harvest value. That's a big money maker, especially if you're someone who's sitting in a position where the crop looks lighter than you were expecting it, not as many bushels. It's been a tough year. You've maybe been hailed out, replanted, all of those things. So if there's a way to capture something on the front end that's really giving you multiples of value, this is something we're looking at for sure. even into that gut slot harvest, we're starting to see pushes here in the last week, starting to see improvements between 10 and 15 cents. Obviously, the best bases in the state exist out west where the crop is the shortest, but that trickle back into the eastern portion of the state is real. We're already seeing values in central Nebraska that are, you know, on this early stuff, first half September, anywhere from 30 to 60 cents better than we expect. Last half September into gut slot October, still anywhere from 15 to 25 cents better than we expect. So we're seeing that trickle back come. And then obviously, if you look at the processor, that whole market in and of itself, you can tell they've been short this summer and they are looking for grain. And so we're seeing that really come to the top here. When you look at basis values, your high volume rail loaders, your feedlots, and your processors, those are the places to be looking right now.
I often like to joke here on Market Journal and ask our guests if they brought their crystal ball to make predictions about the future. But if we look back at seasonal trends, we're crossing into a new month here now into September. What does seasonal trends typically look like this time of year?
Yeah, so I'll say this, as far as seasonality goes this year, the 22 new crop months have not disappointed whatsoever. They have been so in line with what we expect to see from a seasonality standpoint. Right now, we just saw a little bit of a pop, a little bit of a kick off of Pro Farmer's number on corn, a decrease on soybeans, but typically the month of September is a little bit more depressed or quiet on the future side of the equation because we're getting so close to harvest. A lot of times it's more of a wait and see mode. We'll get to harvest before we make any huge market adjustments to, you know, what maybe the yield actually is. So I would not be surprised to see a little bit of a pullback here on futures and continue to see some pressure as we get into this harvest. But again, locally, futures can be one thing, and locally, basis can just outpace it all if it really wants to. So we've got some really great opportunities still, even with a lower board potentially coming our way. Going to be a great opportunity to get into harvest, get things squared up, and kind of feel whole again and figure out where everything is shaking out once we get through the field.
Thanks again to Heather for her time this week. Now, coming up next week, we'll be joined by Darren Newsome of Darren Newsome Analysis. If you have any questions you'd like for Darren to answer, feel free to email those questions in, and we'll be sure to pass them along. Jason Luby and his father Roger have farmed the crop fields at Husker Harvest Days near Grand Island for decades now. Roger has been the farm manager that is, at the show site for 37 years. Things have changed over the nearly 4 decades since the family began their involvement with the show. But Jason can still recall that day when he was around the age of 12 that he saw a new Case IH tractor for the first time there at Husker Harvest Days. The show, in many ways, is all about making memories like that. You can read more about this year's Husker Harvest Days in the September issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is once again time for a check of the weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, it appears that August will be setting records in terms of how dry it has been, not the kind of records we like to set. Do you see things shifting at all as we kick off the month of September?
Well, Alex, the dry conditions pretty much continued as they have been for pretty much the last 2 months. We did see a little scattering of moisture around the state. Most concentrated areas over this last 7-day period in the Omaha Metroplex area, a little bit of south central and central Nebraska, even that was a little scattered and ended up in the northwestern panhandle. Outside of that, most locations did not receive much in the way of significant moisture, less than a 1/4 inch, and in a lot of occasions, once again, zero precipitation. As we go through the next 7 days, it looks like we are going to deal with at least some opportunity for precipitation in the near term, and then we return back to a drier conditions in anticipation of potentially a trough moving into the western United States as we get into around the 9th or the 10th. That would produce some significant moisture across portions of the central United States. So as we go to the upper air miles, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is we're going to using some new graphics. Our data graphics package kind of fell apart on us. So these are from NENCAR. So basically what it's showing is as we go into the day-to-day, we got this high pressure system with troughing to the west. We've got a little bit of a moisture feed that will start to come up from the south. And as we go into the day as tomorrow, we're going to see a little piece of that energy moving across the northern plains. That's going to allow frontal boundary to start pushing southeastward into the Nebraska region, which will allow some moisture to start building up, and potentially the southeastern part of the state will see some moisture with this system. As we get into the day on Monday, we are essentially looking at that trough basically passing by us and the ridge trying to reestablish itself as that trough out of the west just cannot dig down far enough. So we're going to start to return back into temperatures moving up into the upper 80s to the lower 90s east. and we might be just a tad bit warmer to the west. And those conditions continue all the way through the week as we basically sit in high pressure. Again, that trough is to our west. Most of that energy moving up into Canada. Very dry conditions over the Central Plains region. We do have a hurricane that was likely to move up the Baja Peninsula that will bring moisture into the southwest and eventually into this trough as we go into next weekend, but that's a few days away. As we go into the day on Wednesday, this ridge starts to show signs of trying to break down a little bit as this energy rides up over top of it and starts to push the top of the periphery of the ridge down. But still, our temperatures are going to be warm, nothing in the way of any significant moisture expected. And then as we get into Thursday, we start to see this trough making some inroads. A little bit of that moisture comes into the southwest, and we might start to see a little bit of scattered precipitation activity, isolated as it may be in southwest and south central Nebraska. And I think more importantly, as we get into the day on Friday, we'll see this trough starting to make inroads in the Pacific Northwest and the northern plains, and that will start to draw a frontal boundary through the state. And that does appear to be some type of a focus for precipitation, and CPC has been getting very aggressive with that precipitation. We'll see whether or not it verifies. In fact, the 8 to 14-day forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday does keep the warmer temperatures in place, but keeps the core of that heat to our east. But in terms of precipitation, first time in a couple months we've been able to show the entire state of Nebraska with above normal chance for precipitation, so we'll see whether or not it verifies.
Thank you as always, Al. Finally, today you'll likely remember those wildfires this past spring that scorched thousands of acres. Beef producers impacted by those fires might be able to get some help in the terms of financial assistance. The Nebraska Cattlemen Disaster Relief Fund is now accepting applications for aid. With the opportunity to learn more about that program this week with the Executive Vice President of the Nebraska Cattlemen's Association, that is Pete McClymonte. We had some terrible wildfires that affected a lot of beef producers across the state of Nebraska. Nebraska Cattlemen stepping up to help, right?
Absolutely. And so from our experiences 3 years ago with the bomb cyclone that went through, we have the structure in place as well as the experience to help people in need. And so we are in the process of facilitating that and to put it in play to start helping people with dollars.
I'm sure that's a challenging effort when it comes to getting all the infrastructure in place to accept donations from those interested in helping. And now we're talking about maybe the fun part of distributing that to folks in need, right? Talk about the legwork behind that and what things are looking like at this point.
Again, so we learned from 3 years ago and have replicated that. And so it's really about a 3-step process, and that is accepting the money. There's so many benevolent, generous people in our state and across the country that want to help, and they've done that with dollars, and we truly, truly appreciate them for that. And then it's the taking into applications. This never goes as fast as you want because when people experience it, they need help now. And so through insurance companies and government programs, they've done this, and so we're in the process of backfilling and helping those that would apply. And then finally, it's the review process that this separate entity within our structure will look at and make sure people are eligible and they fall within the designated areas. And finally, it's then sending out the checks to help those people.
We talked about the destruction at the time, but maybe remind our viewers some of the challenges that a beef producer might have been facing if the wildfire affected their acres or
if you have lost animals, and our understanding is that has been minimal. People were ready, they got animals in a better spot, and then it's the infrastructure, it's your fencing, it's the actual feed that you might have lost with hay bales. So coming out of a dry winter, you need feed for this summer and into the fall. And so those are devastating things if you want to keep your cow herd in place, your animals alive, because we're looking at great markets for the next 2 years for cow-calf producers.
For those watching today interested, we'll get to the producer side of this, but can organizations or individuals still donate, or have you shut that window down at this point?
We have shut that down after consultation with our accounting support. They've said there has to be a beginning and end, and so we are accepting applications either online, or a producer could go and print off that application and mail it in, and it would be through the end of September. September 30th, we will take those. So please go to our website, nebraskacattlemen.org, and you can find the links there that will help you fill that out. And I think a really important designation that our board of directors in establishing this fund 3 years ago is you do not, I repeat, you do not have to be a member of Nebraska Cattlemen. This is for people negatively impacted, and our board wants to help those in need.
It's Great information to hit on there. Don't have to be a member of the Nebraska Cattlemen to qualify. What is some of the basic information, though, you'll be asking on that application?
Obviously, we want to supplement what they've already got, possibly through a government program, through their insurance companies. So it's for needs that they've lost animals, obviously, you know, the different devastation individually. And one thing that's important to remember is that for the location they are, these are for areas that have been damaged through and verified through the Nebraska Emergency Management Association. And so that's a critically important thing. So that map is also on our website that shows those designated areas. So we have to verify an applicant came from one of those areas negatively impacted to meet the needs to be eligible to receive funds from this effort by our members.
A lot of people, I'm sure, stepped up as this was happening. Anybody in particular you want to mention, whether those donating or those helping with this effort?
So we've had lots of people, just random people that have no connection to us that have given. But there's two associations that I really want to give a strong shout out and a big thank you to. The Nebraska Rural Radio Association at their annual meeting in June stepped up and gave us a significant gift. So thank you to their board and Tim Marshall, as well as our good friends and allies there at the Nebraska Livestock Marketing Association. All the sale barns, you know, have seen that. They see it with their patrons at their businesses, and they also wanted to step up. But those were two significant ones that have made significant contributions, and we give a big shout out and thank you to them.
Thanks to Pete for his time. Again, the application deadline is September 30th. If you have any questions, you're encouraged to reach out to the Nebraska Cattlemen office. We've posted a link with more information along with this story on the Market Journal website. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. But before we go, I want to thank my colleague Alex Wojcicki for filling in over the past few weeks. I was at home spending time with my wife as we recently welcomed our first child into the world. Garrett Duskett was born August 12th, and we couldn't be more grateful and excited about his presence in our lives already. Thanks again for joining us on this week's show. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.